On record?
Yeah, we are on the record now.
Yeah.
I don't really have anything to set it on, but it'll be fine, won't it?
Well, do you have to have the tripod with it?
Don't have to, no.
I mean, you're not going to stand it up. What good does that do to lay it down?
Yeah, it'll just be attached to the car.
Yeah.
How about we... That's not going to sit up
It
there.
doesn't sit too good up there. It's not a very... That might work.
Yeah, we'll just try. Whoops, wait a minute. I'm going to put the hold button in case we decide to hit the off button. It won't work.
Well, I'd take a slosh of your
All right,
coffee if
let me,
it's ready.
Let me light up these
Yeah.
lights so I can have a serving light.
Okay.
You want to... Here, I got your cream first.
I think I'll just give it a lick and a
Oh.
with a towel. It's been
You're gonna be
laying here since Hector was a pup, and that's good enough.
You're going to be a fancy guy and clean your cup out.
Yeah, just slosh it. We'll wash it with coffee, and that'll work.
Right.
Ain't nothing in there that wasn't in there before. We didn't die from back then, so I don't know why I would now.
All right, here we go.
Well, that moon is doing a
Should
fine
pop.
job today, isn't he?
Yep. It's been
Stars
really beautiful
shining,
lately.
too. Yes, it has.
Glad that, let me hold that in my hand.
Okay, you got it.
That'll make me feel better.
Yeah.
That way, if I have to do any juking or moving, I'll know which way to go.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah, thank you.
Welcome. Mine and my... Boy, Stanley is a good...
That is good.
Good. Stanley will keep it hot for a while.
Yeah, we were looking at number 7 on Sunday. You know, 7, I think, is probably the most important number in the book.
I do too.
What is it
But
about,
why?
Yeah, what is it about 7? Why should that be an important number?
Well, I've been looking at it mathematically, knowing that it's something special spiritually for the Lord, but
Yeah.
it's also pretty special with the numbers too. So
Okay.
I'd like to have the other side of it. Maybe some of the things I've been looking at with the number 7 mathematically will mesh into this.
Yeah. Well, of course, you know, everything in the numbers and the letters means something, and if you put them all together, whatever, just combine them, you're getting a picture of who God is, or who Yeshua is, or what he's doing, or what he's done, you know. And what is the whole purpose for the Tanakh? I mean, why did God give the Tanakh? What for?
So people know who he is. People
Well,
know
Now,
him.
Abraham didn't have a Tanakh. Did he
No.
know God?
Yeah, sure.
Well, then how come other people have to have a Tanakh, but Abraham didn't have, Enoch didn't have a Tanakh, but he walked with God. Noah didn't have a Tanakh, but he found favor with God. So why the Tanakh then?
Well, knowing how Yeshua is the revealed word, I know that he gave us the Torah to help us understand that we can't do it alone, or we can't be good alone.
Well, how did Abraham get along without it? He didn't get it.
Well, he had faith.
Well,
He believed in him. He trusted in that God had the power to do what he
we're
said.
still back to this. Why didn't Enoch need the Tanakh? Noah didn't need it. Abraham didn't need it. Abel didn't need it.
Because they had what the Tanakh is here for, so that we could walk with God.
So do we have something better than what they had?
No,
Or did they miss out on something that we've got? I mean, or
I don't think so.
so it's back to the question.
I'll tell you what I've learned from you. I have learned the value of oral history from you, because what you do is oral history.
Okay.
Now, that's what the Jewish faith is built upon.
Yeah.
But it's something that the Christian faith has lost with the Western culture,
Yeah.
because we like to write stuff down so much.
Yeah.
But there's something about even the Apostle Paul, though he was writing wrote in Romans 1:17, he said, this is something that we have from faith to faith.
Yeah.
And, it's a little bitty phrase, but it means a lot, I think. And I think it means the same thing as the Jewish tradition of oral history.
Yeah. Well, okay. Back to what the apostle said. Paul, did the apostle Paul write anything that wasn't in the Tanakh?
I don't think so. I think it was all in there.
He quoted out of it, and he talked about what it said, but did he come up with anything new that wasn't already there? In other words, did the Apostle Paul know more about God than Daniel did?
No.
Or Isaiah? Or Zechariah?
No. Even though there's a lot of people that would say he did because of Jesus, because of what was revealed to him through
Okay.
that.
The Lord talked, I think it's in John 8, where he said, Abraham rejoiced to see my day. And of course he said, you're not even 50 years old. You've seen Abraham?
Yeah.
Said, before Abraham was, I am. So when did Yeshua come on the scene?
He's always been there.
Yeah. Before Abraham. How far back before Abraham?
Before Abraham was, I am.
How far? 1 year before Abraham? 2 years?
From the very beginning.
How about was he there for Noah?
Yeah.
Did Enoch know him?
Yeah.
So Yeshua didn't come on the scene in the so-called New Testament, did he?
No, it wasn't just.
So when the apostle talked about him, he talked about somebody that those old-timers already knew about.
Yeah.
So what did the apostle Paul say about Yeshua that Zechariah didn't know? Or Habakkuk? Or Daniel?
Well, I like
Would Daniel come up to Paul and say, wow, I didn't know that? Can you expect Daniel would say that to Paul?
Well, I think your question would be silly if you asked it this way. But even though people have a problem with it, it would be the same thing as saying, did Mark have something new to say about Yeshua than Matthew did?
Well, okay. Which one knew more about Yeshua, Matthew or Mark?
They all knew him.
Was there any, do you think there was any essential difference?
I don't think there was any essential.
Okay. So when Matthew wrote about Yeshua, he was simply describing Yeshua the King.
Yes.
Mark was writing about Yeshua the suffering servant.
Mm-hmm.
Now, does that mean that Mark doesn't know anything about Yeshua the King?
No.
It just means that his job
Yeah.
was to tell us about Yeshua the servant.
Mm-hmm.
Matthew was to tell us about the king. Luke was to tell about the human form that he took.
Mm-hmm.
And John was to tell about the deity.
And Paul was supposed to tell us about the Messiah who also appeals to the Gentiles.
Yes. Okay, now you hit on something. The question back to this. Why do we have the Tanakh, and do we need the Tanakh?
Yes.
Then why didn't Abraham need it?
Oh. Because
he's smarter than us?
Well, the nature of God is he gives us what we need of him.
Well,
right?
Yes, but it's still this. If knowing God, is it because of your education that you know God?
No.
Or because of your skill, your talent, or something like that?
No.
So I'm still hammering on the question. Do we need the Tanakh?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, we need it. But why didn't Abraham need it? Why didn't Noah need it? Why didn't...
Did he have it already? Did he have it written in his heart? Just like Jeremiah said?
Okay, okay, now we're back to Jeremiah. That's good.
Okay.
Well, Jeremiah said, I'm going to bring in a new covenant.
Right.
And it won't be like the old one. What was the old covenant anyway? What was he talking about when he said the old one?
He was referring to God's way of living put down on a stone.
Okay, and so we call that Torah or Tanakh, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, of course, the replacement theologists say that was all done away with.
Right.
No longer valid. We don't need it. So
Right.
we can just forget that. But Jeremiah didn't say it is to be forgotten. He said, I'm gonna make a new covenant, and here's the way it's new. Instead of it being written on tables of stone, I'm going to write on your heart. What is he going to write on your heart?
Torah.
He's going to write on it exactly what the stone tablet said, isn't he?
Yeah.
Except that it won't be something when you read it on the stone tablets, you're reading numbers and letters. Now, this is where we're getting to. You're reading things that were written down that you could read. But when he writes it on your heart, then can we say, I don't need the written Tanakh anymore?
No.
So what does writing it on your heart do for you that being written on table of stone wouldn't do?
It makes it readily available to you, and it's where you live. It's your temple.
Okay. Now realize something happened during the time of the apostles that hadn't happened before.
It is that direct interface, right?
Well, what happened during the time of the apostles that had not been happened, at least not in the same manner before? You brought it up a few minutes ago.
Yeshua sending the Spirit to all people.
Yeah, that's exactly. In fact, the apostles were amazed when they found Gentiles that had learned who Yeshua is.
Yeah, they were.
In fact, they said, how can that be? We never thought that possible. But you go back to Isaiah, and it says very clearly that the Lord would be a light to the Gentiles, didn't he?
Mm-hmm.
How come they didn't get that?
Because they've never seen it before, probably.
Well, it was there. The Pharisees all studied
Mm-hmm.
that. Didn't they ever read about the light to the Gentiles? Hundreds of times, didn't they? But somehow it just didn't register with them. So the apostles were used mostly to carry the Tanakh to the Gentiles, weren't they?
Yeah.
I mean, a couple of them stayed around Jerusalem, but most of them went somewhere else. Didn't the Apostle Paul went to the Gentiles?
Yeah.
Peter went to the Gentiles. Thomas went to the Gentiles. You know, most all of them. In fact, he said...
There's stories about all of them.
Yeah, and the Lord said, okay, you're going to be witness to me in Jerusalem and in Judea, which is right where we are, but where else?
Uttermost parts of the world.
And how far does that go? That goes all the way to Timbuktu and North Korea.
And there are
and
traditions in just about every culture of
Yes.
the apostles visiting them.
Yeah. Now,
Like Andrew to Ukraine.
yeah. So here we are, the Goyim, which is the Gentiles. And by the way, that's not a bad word. Goyim doesn't mean bad. It's like referring to someone who isn't an American as a foreigner.
Right.
That's not an insult to call him a foreigner, is it?
No.
It just means you're not of this country. That's
Right.
all. The Goyim means you're not a Jew
Right.
or you're not an Israelite. So you are literally a foreigner or something like that. But so most of the apostles took the truth, the Torah, the new covenant, they took it to the Gentiles. The Gentiles, had they ever studied Hebrew Torah?
No.
No. So how are you going to get them to understand what it's all about? They've never read Torah, most of them. So the Lord says, okay, you'll take it to them, even in the written form. But, you know, Israel did not understand. They read it, they studied it, they still didn't understand it.
Mm-hmm.
So if they couldn't understand it, and they had heard about it through their forefathers ever since Adam, how do you expect a Chinaman to understand it, or a Mexican, or a Canadian. So the Lord says, the new covenant, I'll write it on your heart. Okay. When it's written on your heart, what does that do to you? Does it show anywhere? I mean, if you see someone walk, can you tell if the Torah is written on their heart, the covenant?
Not exactly, but
not just seeing, because it doesn't show through outwardly, but it is there if they're the Lord's people.
Yeah.
Does that mean we don't need the written Tanakh anymore?
I don't think so, no. Because
we still need it, don't we?
Oh, yeah. It gives us, well, you know, Paul said it's our teacher to bring us.
So writing it on the heart does not mean that I understand everything about that, but it means it changes how I act. It changes the attitudes that I have from the inward man. It changes my response when God speaks something, whether I'm going to be receptive to that or reject it, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But I still had to read it to see what does it actually say about anything. For example, someone could have the Torah, the covenant, written on the heart, but then you ask them to explain the letter Zayin. Are they going to be able to handle that?
Not necessarily, no.
Because that's not what's written in the heart. What's written in the heart is our relationship to God, isn't it?
Yeah.
And so when we have a proper relationship to God, and it's written in the heart, then when issues come up, our response and our reaction is going to be like God would handle things, because that's where it comes from.
Yeah.
You know, the Lord said, for example, out of the mouth proceeds, we're going to say things that reflect God's action on the inward man.
Yeah.
But the Tanakh is still there to explain to us exactly what this is all about. So it all comes back to the letters and numbers. You know, everything that we see written is made up of the letters and numbers, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, that's what you're right. Of course, in the old, I'm going to turn the heater on.
Yeah, it's
in
cool.
the old days, they would.
I won't get out the biscuits.
Yeah, that's on. They would have what they call pictorial script. You know.
Yeah.
You know about that.
Yeah.
The modern, what they call a square script, even though in some ways it also illustrates something by its forms, the pictorial script was a little bit more literal, or a little bit more easily seen. For example, if you're going to look at the letter Aleph, made of 3 letters, you know, 2 Yuds and a Vav.
Yeah.
You show that to a guy who's never read any Hebrew letters, what would it mean to him?
Nothing.
Nothing. But if you showed him some pictorial script, like the ancients used, hey, that looks like the head of an ox.
Yeah.
Well, that's exactly what Aleph means, the ox.
Yeah.
So the pictorial script was almost like putting it in a sort of a kindergarten level for people who never understood the real word in it. Okay. So anyway,
see if you like that.
I'm sure I will. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
That looks good. Beautiful.
Yeah. You doing okay on the juice?
Yeah, so far it won't last long. So we started off with number 7. What's so important about 7?
Well, it was the Shabbat. And it's 1 plus man's number.
Yeah.
So that 1 is God's number. So it's God's number, man's number.
Well,
put together.
How did 6 get to be man's number? I mean,
we talked about that last week.
Yeah. Well, you know, I had something there that was so earth-shattering it kind of walked away from me, but the creation days, we normally think of them as 7 days, which the grouping is 7. All right. And of course, the beginning day was not called the first day. It was called day 1.
Day 1.
Yom Echad. All right. Why wasn't it called the first day?
It's cardinal, not ordinal.
If it were called the first day, and it is the day of beginning, how can you have a first beginning? Because by implication, if you have a first beginning, then you would have to have a second beginning and a third beginning. Well, if you're going to do any project, and we said this in our lesson, if a lady was going to bake a cake, you got to start somewhere. Okay, maybe the first thing you do is you walk in the kitchen and turn the lights on. That's the first thing you do. Now you have begun. Now, that's it. How many beginnings do you have? You've had it.
Yep.
You've already begun. There is no second beginning. You've only had one because that's all there is. There's only one beginning. All right? So, day 1, Yom Echad, is beginning day, and once it's done, there are no more beginnings, are they? That's it. So it's just one. It's not the first. If it were the first, anytime you say something is the first thing, then it follows there must be a second thing, isn't there?
Yeah.
And so on.
Yeah. Exactly.
So is God the first God?
No, he's the one God.
He is the one God. If he were the first God, then there would be a second God, a third, and thousands of gods, like every other culture practically believes, right?
Yeah.
So, but he's not the first God. He is the one God. All right, so then you go to the last day is called Shabbat. Why wasn't it called the 7th day?
Question. Why wasn't it called the 7th day? Was it called day 7?
Yes. No, it wasn't called day 7. Called Shabbat.
Called Shabbat.
What does Shabbat mean?
Stop.
Stop. Stop what?
Stop the beginning.
You've already had a beginning. And then you have 2nd through 6th. 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th days. Because each one of them implies there's another one following. But you get to the last one and you say, stop. When in Hebrews, I think it's in 10th chapter, it says the Lord is the author and finisher of our faith.
You ready for your next one?
Yeah.
Okay.
What does the author do?
He tells the story, writes it.
If he is the author, is he copying somebody else's work?
Nope, he's a creator.
So he's a creator. So what does he do when he sits down to write something?
He's creating.
No.
He's writing down his creation.
He begins. He begins the story, doesn't he? He begins to write.
Uh-huh.
So he's doing exactly the same thing that Yom Echad does. It's the beginning. When the Lord is the author of our faith, he is the beginner of it.
Yeah.
He is the Yom Echad. He's the first. What did he call himself? I am the Aleph and the Tav.
Uh-huh.
Not the first. I said that wrong. He's not the first. He is the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Aleph Tav. What's the beginning letter of Aleph Tav? It's Aleph. and that is the one.
Yeah.
What's the tav?
The last.
That's the last or the final one. So he says he is the author. When an author is going to write a story, he begins, and then at the end of his story, there's some way he writes something to imply that
It is finished.
It's the end of it. So he's the author and the finisher. Now, if an author wrote a story and then somebody comes along and says, "I'm going to add to that. I didn't like the way you know. I'm going to put some more on there." How's the author going to feel about that?
Nope. Not your place.
Isn't there a place where the Lord says, "Don't take away anything from what I've written and don't add anything"? If you add something to it, what's going to happen?
You'll get all the curses.
Yeah, I'm going to add the curses that are in there. So don't do it.
You can set it here if you need to.
Yeah, I just wanted to turn that thing off. Maybe you can reach over there and just switch that off.
Just turn the switch off?
Yeah, that's good. So he is the first. He is day one, Yom Echad, and he is also Shabbat. He is the author. He is the finisher. He is the Aleph. He is the Tav. And so all three of those, the creation days are a picture of him. The idea of writing a story or a book or something is a picture of him. And the letters, Aleph, Tav, are a picture of him. Does that mean he is only the Aleph and the Tav? What about all the other 20 letters that are in? There's 22
I'm
letters.
Sure he's filling in every one of those ideas too.
But each one of those, you take the day one, Yom Echad, that's the beginning day. You have Shabbat, that is the ending day, the day it stops. And in between, you have ordinal numbers. Each day in the in-between ones. By the way, none of them have a name. You know what? They're not named. They just have a number. First day, Yom Rishon. Second day, third day, fourth day. There's no name for any of them. Mm-hmm. In our culture, every day has its own name. Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Not in Hebrew. Just first one, second one, third one. So if you just look at the numbers, what's the difference between the first day and the third day? Just looking at it.
2.
What's the difference? This day fitted in here, then there's the second day that fits there, the third one fits. There's no difference between them, are they? They're just, the only difference is what number, where do they fit in the order? Mm-hmm. Psalm 31 says, "My times are in your hands." Like saying, you fit me in wherever you want me to be. Mm-hmm. So who am I? I'm just day one or not day one, day 2 or day 3 or something like that. A third day, second day. I just fit in here somewhere. Who determines where I fit into it?
He does.
He says, my times are in your hands. So it's almost like the creation days, the first day, or I keep saying it, the beginning day is Yeshua. He is the author. He is the beginner. He is the day one. He is letter one, which is Aleph. And then you go all the way through it. You get to the last one is Shabbat. It's not a number. No number on that one. It's not called the seventh day. It's called the day of ending, or the day it's finished. What was the last words the Lord said before he died?
It's finished.
It's finished. What's finished? Well, his work throughout all salvation had a beginning, and then it has a finishing, or let's say an accomplishment. Mm-hmm. I've got it done, what I came to do. Once it's done, then what do you do after that? Once it's done.
Celebrate? I don't know.
Well, if you've been working out on a project, and you work all day, and then it's finally, okay, that's all done now. Now what do you do right now? It's done.
Go home. You rest.
You sit down. Through working, it's done. Now, God didn't stop working because he's tired. You know, the idea of rest makes it sound like I'm just exhausted from all this hard work I did. Now I got to sit and take a break. God doesn't have a Shabbat because he's tired. It's not because he needs to recuperate from all his effort. It simply means stop. Why stop? Because it's done. There's nothing more to do once you stop and once you're done, do you? If you're doing any project...
So he didn't stop because he was tired. He stopped because he was done.
Because it's finished. If you had a big project going and someone comes and say, well, how's it coming? It's all finished. So what do you do then? It's all finished. If you say, oh, well, I still got to put the tools away. No, it's not finished then. Mm. But now you can say, okay, I finished the project. I put all the tools away. I've cleaned up the scrap. Everything is done. I washed my hands. Now let's just go sit down. There's no more work to do. That's exactly what Shabbat means, isn't it? If you make Shabbat into anything more than that, you miss the point, because when he says he rested, or that's only in our English translation. We could say if he stopped. If you came back to him and say, well, yes, but don't you have to do this or that? What would he say?
Nope.
It's
finished.
Whatever needed to be done is done. There is nothing more to do. But here we are. We're fitted in between the Aleph and the Tav, like day 2 or the second day, the third day, the fourth day. If you came to the second day and you say to him, well, what happens now? What would he say? You've come to the second day. Now what happens? Second day, here you are. What happens next? You're the second day. What happens next?
Whatever is assigned to you. Right?
No. What happens next?
Oh, third day.
Got to have a third day. Oh, Mr. Third Day. What happens next?
Fourth day.
Fourth day. See, after each of these appointed times or ordinal times, there's a following one. You can't say at day 2 it's over. You can't say it's finished, because day 3 has his position. You go to day 3. Is it finished? Not yet. Day 4 has to happen, see? Mm-hmm. So in between Aleph and Tav, in between Yom Echad and Shabbat, there's an order of things that each one has a following one coming after it. Mm-hmm. So it looks to me like the creation 7 is a picture of the Lord himself is the beginning, and he is the finishing, and in between it is all his people. Uh-huh. Now, when they're in between day 1, Yom Echad, and Shabbat, do they do anything?
Do the days in between do anything?
Yes.
Well, they're a container for whatever's happening.
They're not useless, are they?
No.
Because on this second day, certain things happen. On the third day, things. On the fourth day, trees and plants and things, the animals are created. Fifth day, things happen.
They're all appointments.
So they have a position. Something must be accomplished. But the day themselves do not create anything. Mm-mm. Whatever happens on their day happens at the works of the Creator, mm-hmm. Aleph Tav, but he works through them. Mm-hmm. So, in other words, things happen because he uses those days, doesn't he?
Yeah.
Can you see a picture of the Lord's people in that? Things happen in our life if he uses us. Mm-hmm. But it's still his doing. Mm-hmm. So when he says, I am the Aleph,
the toolbox.
Yeah, I am the Aleph and the Tav, it doesn't mean he's only the Aleph and only the Tav and all those letters in between or something else. But they are the the things that are fitted in their order of number to be used to accomplish whatever else he's doing. So everything that we read in the writing,
that's a good picture.
It comes from all the 22 letters, doesn't it?
Yeah.
You know, are every one of the 22 letters used in the Tanakh?
Yeah.
Every one of them. Now, some of them are used more than others. We read about Isaiah, for example. He may have been used a lot more than some other guy, or the Apostle Paul may have been used more than another. But whatever the other one, even the one that didn't do very much, he did have a place in the order. And if you took his place away, even though it was the little one, would that cause any harm?
Well,
if you took his place away.
Well, yeah.
What if we said, well, we'll never use the letter Lamed again? We don't need that. We can write everything without Lamed.
No, you can't do that.
It may not be used very often, but it is used, and when it's used, it needs to be used, you know.
Yeah. It's the precise job, tool for the job.
You know, I brought that up. I said, what's the most important tool in your toolbox? Which is the most important tool?
The one you need right now.
The one you need right now.
Uh-huh.
You may not use it once in 10 years, but if you need it right now, that is the most important tool you got. What if you said, well, I hardly ever use it, I'll just get rid of it? Sooner or later, you're going to wait. I shouldn't have done. I needed
That's
that
exactly
one.
right.
So every letter in the Aleph Tav has a purpose and a use, and who put it there anyway.
The Lord himself.
All part of God's doing. So he had a reason for those things. So back to our question, what is it about 7? Well, the 7 is a picture of everything from Aleph to Tav, isn't it? Everything that God has done is pictured by 7. And, of course, you look at the number 7 if you were going to just interpret, what does 7 mean? You know, if you're going to interpret it, what does 7 mean?
It's a number.
Well, of course it's a number. What does it mean? It has a meaning.
I don't know.
Yeah, you do. When you read 7, what are you talking about in the 7?
It's the one between 6 and 8.
You can do better than that.
Okay.
That's kindergarten. Come on. What is 7? If you read about the number 7 in the book, what are you talking about?
Completion.
Okay. Complete, perfect,
Yeah.
absolute, ultimate, infinite, a whole bunch of stuff, but what's it really talking about?
Yeshua.
Yeah, it's a picture of who God is, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I said, God himself is the number 7. Perfect, complete, whole, entire, without fault, without shortage, without blemish. You know, it says the words of the wise are like silver refined in a crucible, like gold refined 7 times.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you know, he's using, of course, everything's a parable. If you were a metalsmith, you'd know about refining metal. What you know a little bit about what is refining? What do you do when you're refining metal? So it's like gold refined 7. What's this refining
You
about?
Take out the impurities.
Okay, how do you do it?
With intense heat.
Okay, you heat it up in a crucible, and the impurities float up on the top. You skim them off. It's called slag.
Yeah.
But there'll probably be still a little bit of impurity left in it. So you do it again.
Yeah.
There'll be more slag come off. When will it be absolutely perfect?
After all the slag's gone.
When? It says it'll be like gold refined 7 times.
7 times.
Now,
Okay.
Now realize that's a parable.
Right.
No metalsmith would likely do it 7 times, but he might do it 2 or 3 times. But if he really wanted pure, but it's not to tell you how to refine gold. That's not what the purpose is. But from a standpoint of a man who worked metal, that would be an extreme. Who would ever do it 7 times? But he said the words of the wise, in other words, God's words are flawless. They're like gold that's been refined 7 times. And if it were refined 7 times, at least for the sake of the parable, what kind of gold would you have then?
Pure and perfect.
It'd be absolutely pure. You would have got all the slag out of it. So he said, the words of God are flawless, like gold refined 7 times. All right, so whenever you read 7, and of course it started in Genesis chapter 1 there at the beginning, from beginning to the final finishing of everything, 7 just pictures everything's done. It's finished, it's total, it's entire. And in fact, when God gave the evaluation of his creation at the end of the last one, he said, it's very good. Tov me'od. And the other day he said it's tov, it's good. But when he said it's good, well, how good was it?
Very good.
But he doesn't use the word very good because it's not done yet.
Okay.
You can't say, as long as there's still something more to do. Now, it doesn't mean there's anything wrong with it, but it's not done yet. So it's not time to call it very good. When you put on very good, can you get better than very good?
No.
That's it. That's the final conclusion, you see. So the term very good indicated it's done now. There's nothing more need to be done. You don't need to make any final adjustments. You don't need to repair anything. Everything is done. Okay? So can you see how the creation story, which covers 7 periods or days or whatever, the Aleph Tav and the idea of an author and finisher are all talking about the same thing. And then, of course, in between each one, which starts with a beginning and ends up with a final thing, there are things in between that are always waiting for the next thing to come along. Mm-hmm. And it seems to me like that's a good picture of the Lord's people. We all have a place to fit into it, and we do what we were made. If I'm a Zayin or a Mem or something, that's fine. Even if I did everything that I was made to do, if I did it perfectly, if I did exactly like I should do it, there'd still be someone else to follow, another letter coming afterward. So that means even if I did it right, it could not be called very good because there's still more to do. But when you get to Tav, the word is it's finished. Mm-hmm. So what do you think? Does that make some sense?
It does, and it's perfect because I mean, some of the biggest controversies in Christianity are people squabbling about, the way things are appointed by God, and does God appointing things, does that take away our choices?
Yeah.
Does His sovereignty take away our choices? And that kind of, to me, that answers that because and it also plays into what the Apostle Paul said about how each one of us are a member of the body. Mm-hmm. And of course, he's tying that into the body of Christ. So, it completes that idea of the temple of God, and it's good.
And you remember a time when the disciples were arguing with each other about who's the most important.
Yeah.
Or who's the greatest.
Yeah.
I'm freezing again.
It is cold. Cold today.
Yeah. So, which one of the apostles was the most important?
They all had their spot.
They just fitted in the program and wherever the Lord wanted them.
Yeah.
Each one was important for his particular position because that's what God wanted him to do. But does God have some things that are more important for him to do than other things?
For that one guy to do?
No. Does God have things more important for himself to do, one thing more important than another?
Yeah.
That God's doing.
I would say yeah.
What's more important for God to do than anything else he does?
Salvation.
So what did you do that's
Rescue.
less important? Can you put a less important onto God?
No.
So what does he do that's less important than something else?
I guess it's all right on.
So it's right
important.
back to the top. Which letter is the most important?
All of them.
They're all the
Stop
same.
place.
They're all equal. Now, realizing the Lord himself says, I'm the olive, I'm the first, I'm the begin. I keep saying that. It's not the first.
Right.
I'm the beginning, and I am the finish.
Yeah.
But I'm also the one that empowers everything else in there.
Yeah.
Without him, without the Lord in it, what good could a Nun do or a Samak? What good could any letter do if the Lord himself wasn't working through them?
They couldn't do anything.
So here we have the written Torah. We've asked them, do we need the Tanakh? Which part of the Tanakh is the least important?
There's no least
We can't
important.
go there. Which one is the most
Yeah.
important?
Yeah, you can't do that.
If one was less important than another, would have been all right if I had just skipped that one.
No,
Why do you put it in there?
because it's important.
And there would be a time when that tool was needed
Yeah.
by something,
Yeah,
and that would become the most important tool
Yeah.
in the box. wouldn't
that's
it?
right. That's right.
Even if it was only used once.
Yeah.
So when the Lord healed a blind guy, for example, we never hear any more about the blind. Whatever happened, we don't know. Does that mean because that operation was not important?
No, it played its part.
And somehow it fitted into the whole program. So, the question I had to begin is, do we need the Tanakh? Yes, because it helps us to understand exactly what this is all about, you see.
Mm-hmm.
And the Tanakh itself, I've said everything's a parable. The Tanakh's a parable.
Mm-hmm.
In Proverbs chapter 1, the first 5 or 6 verses, or even less, it says, this is the purpose of the Proverbs. What are those purposes? Do you remember? It's in Proverbs chapter 1. You got your thing there?
I don't.
Oh, you don't? Okay.
No.
Okay, you've got it memorized. What is the first few verses of Proverbs?
Well, I know Proverbs 1:7.
Okay,
That's
what
the
is it?
fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom.
That's the finality of the list.
Right.
But it says for learning how to live in prosperity or something, and
Listen to
finally it
these
comes
words,
down. I
son.
think number 6 maybe. By the way, there's 7 things that are listed there.
That's right.
Is for understanding the riddles and parables of the wise.
Right.
So who's the wise?
Anybody that listens to
No.
Well, Yeshua,
Yeah.
the Lord.
Is the Lord a wise man?
He is the wise man.
Yeah, very good. I'm glad to hear you say he is not a wise man. If he's a wise man, then there must
are
be
others.
other wise men.
Right. He is the one wise
Yeah,
man.
he is the wise man.
Yeah.
So if we're understanding the riddles and words of the wise, what are we understanding?
His word.
Yes. And so here we have the book of Proverbs.
Yeah.
Who wrote that? This fool named Solomon. I call him that because he fell right into idolatry and messed up, but
But he had his role to play.
yes. But he did. And is he God's man?
Yep.
He did some of the most, he was given this tremendous wisdom, and yet he did some of the most foolish things that a man could do. He couldn't even follow his own wisdom, could he?
But I was listening to Exodus today, and a lot of people get tripped up on how God hardened his heart,
Yeah,
but he hardened his heart
sure.
because he was the toughest guy around.
Talking about Pharaoh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If Pharaoh hadn't been tough, then everybody would have said, well,
Where did you hear? Who was you said you're listening to? Where'd you get that?
Just MP3 off the computer.
Okay, that's very good teaching, because when the way it's written in our English translation, a lot of people think it says God hardened his heart. That means God made him bad.
Right.
It's not what it means at all.
Right.
It's just what you said. God made him tough.
Yeah.
Now, why did he make him tough?
So when God flexed his muscle, everybody would see that
Okay.
there was
Yeah.
no tougher man in the land that God couldn't overcome.
Yeah. Well, in when the apostles wrote, quoting out of that, he said, God says about Pharaoh, for this reason I raised you up. This reason. What? What's the reason? This is the reason I raised you up, Pharaoh. Why? It says what it
They will
was.
know that I'm the Lord.
Well, it says that I might show my power in you.
Oh yeah.
So, does he want to show Pharaoh something?
Yeah,
I don't think so.
I do.
Pharaoh's an enemy.
Well,
Does
the
Why-
reason I say that is because of that phrase that I said, and they will know that I'm the Lord.
who's they?
Well, I think he says it for the Egyptians and the Israelites.
Well, who does he want to know that he is the Lord?
I think everybody. Do we have a disagreement here?
We do.
Okay.
When the Lord was confronted by Satan in the wilderness for what's commonly referred to as the temptation, bad word, why did that come about? God summoned Satan to that.
Right.
That was God's plan.
Uh-huh.
Satan did not volunteer for the operation. He did not want to come to it and would have done anything to get away from it, but he couldn't. He was summoned. So why? What for?
To test Yeshua.
What?
Well, to show that Yeshua was
Okay,
worthy.
show him to
of-
who?
To the people who would follow the wisdom.
To you
of
and
the
me.
Lord.
That's
Yeah,
who he
me
did
and
it
you,
for.
Yeah.
He did not do it to show Satan anything.
No.
He, by the way, what does Satan need to learn about God?
Nothing. He knows.
He knows it. And what does
Knows
God
who he
want
is.
to teach Satan?
Nothing.
He doesn't. I mean, his interest is not in Satan. His interest is in his people. So when he runs a test on the Lord, is God trying to find out if the Lord really is anything or not?
No.
And he doesn't care what Satan thinks. He's using Satan to show us who the Lord is.
Right.
Now, does Satan, if someone says to you, somebody's dealing with you and they're just using you, what does that mean?
Means they're gonna do what they want to, and then they're gonna get rid of you
Yeah. So why are they messing with you?
because you got something.
You can
You
serve
can do something that they want.
that.
done.
Yeah, you can serve their interests in
Yeah.
some way, and as soon as you're done with it, they'll kick you out because they don't care anything about you.
Right.
It's themselves. So, does Satan want to be used by God?
No.
Did Pharaoh want to be used by God?
No. He wanted to serve his own
He
purpose.
said, "Who's God? I obey
National
him. I do what
purposes.
I'm the God around here."
That's
But
right.
the Lord said, "I raised you up because I want to use you."
Mm,
Now, does Pharaoh want to be used by God?
No.
No, absolutely not. Neither does Satan. They don't have a choice. And God said, "I want to use you. I'm going to use you whether
Yeah.
you like it or not." How about Pontius Pilate?
yeah, same thing.
Didn't
was
he
used-
say, "Don't you know that I have power over you?" And the Lord said, "The only power around here is from my Father, and He wants to use you.
Yeah.
And as soon as He's done using you, you'll go right down. We'll never hear of Him again." Have you ever heard anything more about Him? He just disappears because his purpose was served. Did he want to be used by God?
No.
So anyway, God raises these characters up, and so. Where was I going with all that? Such wonderful teaching, and I can't even remember what I was saying.
Well, we were talking about the. Did God want to show the Egyptians who he was?
Okay, so yeah, so the whole point is when God does these tests, it's because His people so quickly forget who it is that serves them, or that has saved them, or who supplies their needs, or who is their wall of fire around them, or their protection, or anything else, or their shepherd. Remember when the Israelites were crossing the wilderness from Egypt, and they pleaded for water, and the Lord supplied rivers of water in the desert for them. And they said, "Well, God can bring water, all right, but can He also bring bread?" Or
Yeah. Yeah.
And so God does things to show them, yes, I can even do that.
Mm-hmm.
But it cost them for even asking such questions. But the whole point was, He's saying, It's my people who need to know who he is. God did not do things to show the enemy anything. He's not educating the enemy. He's not interested. If Satan learned any more about God, would that make Satan better? I mean, he is the enemy, and he'll always be the enemy. He always was the enemy. So, but the only ones the Lord wants to show anything to is his people. We're the ones who need to know who he is. We can say, some guy asked a friend of mine, "Do you know the Lord?" He said, "Somewhat." And it was a pretty good answer, because I can't say that I know the Lord. Not in the sense that, well, now I know all about God. So I just barely began to scratch the surface of who he is. I got a tiny little idea of something about who he is. The vastness of the Lord is so infinitely great that I can't. How could I say I know that? I barely begin to touch on it. But the Lord wants us to know him. So he gives it to us line on line, precept, a little here, a little there. We learn a little at a time. And sometimes, the question was, why do we need the Tanakh? He writes things down so we can look at it, because we so quickly forget, And so we quote Bible verses and things as reminders of what we've already learned about it. Now, if you read a Bible verse, you don't suddenly get some information that was never there before, but it may be the first time you thought about it.
Yeah, that's true.
And the first time it had an effect on your feeling or something. But so there is a purpose for it, and we do need it. Now, when we ask the question, well, did Abraham need? He didn't have the Tanakh. Where did he get his information about who God is?
From God himself.
Yeah, and we can't explain how that worked exactly, but somehow God communicated directly with him, and he got it. He got a lot of pretty good detailed stuff.
Yeah.
How about Noah?
Same thing.
And how about Enoch? It says Enoch walked with God. And it's called a testimony, just say he walked with God.
Yeah.
Well, what does that mean, he walked with him? What does that mean?
Sounds a lot like what Adam used to do with him.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes the word walk is just used symbolically, or like a parable of just living. That's your walk.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean you're actually physically walking across the parking lot, but
King James actually used it that way.
Yeah, but it means this is your. We use the word. This is your conversations.
Yeah.
We use conversation meaning talk, but conversation means how you live.
Yeah.
How do you
manner of life.
Yeah. So anyway. We tend to forget so quickly truth, so the Lord lays this Tanakh out for us to give us a constant reminder of it. And, of course, many things in it. All the parables, what's the purpose of a parable? It's to show us a little bit more about who God is. But the parable is written in a secret code. Mm-hmm. Not everybody can understand a parable. So how do you understand a parable then?
Got to be revealed to you.
Yeah, and, another one back to Proverbs says, if you search for it like for hidden treasure, which means you got to really dig into it a little bit. You got to cut under the surface. You can't just walk by and take a glance at it and say, well, that was it, because, and you wonder, why do some people come to see and really understand things about God and others don't? It's not because they're smarter or because they're better or they're more worthy or something, but I think it's just because they're willing to take the effort to search for it. If you're searching really diligently, you're really looking seriously at something that's hard to find, you're going to have to work hard. You're going to take time to do it. You're going to, you can't just skim by and take a quick glance at it. You won't get it. And some people do it, some don't, A lot of places you see the word if. If you seek me with all your heart. When the minute you say if, what are you saying?
You got a choice.
You got a choice. Because if doesn't require you to do anything, does it? But it says, maybe you'll do this, and by implication, what if you don't? If you seek me, you'll find me. It doesn't say if you don't, but it implies, what if you don't seek me? You won't find me. So that's important, isn't it? And now that number 7, we were talking about that. In most cases, I think it's just another way of saying God, because it implies infinity, perfection, holiness, everything that's the way it ought to be. Absolute completion, no lack, no shortage. Everything is completely, just everything. That's just another way of saying God. But it's sometimes used in a bad way.
The 7 is?
Yes. For example, it says there's 6 things the Lord hates. 7 are an abomination to him. And then he names off 7 things that come right out of the demonic spirits. So there's a 7, but it doesn't mean God's perfection, but it does mean absolute, total. It always means that. There was the woman Mary Magdalene, Magdalia was a village or a place, an area that she was from. That's why she called Magdalene.
Yeah.
She's a resident of that place. Anyway, the Lord says he cast 7 devils out of her.
I mean, she was completely obsessed.
She was absolutely demon-possessed. And the 7 there doesn't mean there were 7 devils. It means 7 means that she was completely filled with devils. The 7 doesn't mean a number, but it means a situation of being totally involved. So sometimes it's used like that. When David went out to meet with Goliath, there were 7 entities in that story. There was David, that's Goliath, and Goliath, that's 2, and there were 5 rocks. Now, rocks is an interesting word. We think of rock, they're little round rocks. But the Lord said, I am the rock of salvation. And what was it that took Goliath down? A rock. And it wasn't just because David's a great slingshot guy or because the rocks were just the right size or anything. It's because they are a picture, in fact, of the Lord himself. But there's 7 things there, see. One who is God's man, one who is a total enemy, and then there's 5 of something that is the power that it took for this good guy to pull down the bad guy, Without the rocks, what could David have done to Goliath? That's what God used.
He would have had to use something else.
Yeah. Well, he had nothing else.
Right.
That's all he had with him was a sling.
Yeah.
What could the sling do to Goliath if there was no rocks?
No rocks, no.
That'd be like pointing a gun at somebody, got no ammunition.
Having a bow and just going,
do
boing.
nothing, yeah. Watch the string twang. So, when Abraham went up to Mount Moriah with Isaac, there were 7 entities in that story. Name them.
Abram, Isaac,
That's 2.
the mule,
Okay.
donkey,
3.
2 servants,
That's up to 5.
and can we count the Lord?
Well, was he there?
The ram.
The ram was there. That's
the ram,
6.
Yeah, and the wood for sacrifice.
Huh?
Are we counting people?
People are living things.
Living things.
Not the wood.
What else is there?
The most important one of all.
The Lord himself.
Isn't he the one that was directing this thing?
Yeah.
If he hadn't been there, for one thing, Abraham never would have done that at all.
Right.
It would have had no purpose and no meaning. And even if he did go so far as what he did do, he would have killed Isaac because the Lord's the one who stopped him. So can you see there was 7?
Yeah. For
Which
sure.
one of them would be all right to just leave him out?
Can't leave them out.
But even the 2 servants, what was their names?
We don't know their names.
How old were they?
We don't know anything about them.
Are you sure they were both males?
No.
What do you know about them?
Nothing.
Yes, you do. You know something about them.
Well, they did what Abraham said.
They obeyed Abraham.
Yeah.
Now, Abraham gave them a little bit of jobs to do. What were they to do? What was the reason for them being in this thing?
Whatever Abraham wanted.
Well, what? Name something.
They carried stuff?
What'd they carry?
Probably the wood for sacrifice.
Isaac carried that, and the donkey hauled it out there, so they didn't do that.
Maybe carried the food?
What food?
Well, they went on a 3-day journey, didn't they?
There's something specific that he told them to do.
I don't remember.
He told them, wait here with the donkey. The
Okay.
boy and I are going to go up the hill and worship, and when we're done,
And when
we'll
we
come back.
back.
Their job was to watch the donkey.
Okay.
Abraham told them to do that. Now, they're his servants. Do you think they did it?
Yeah.
Well, what's so important about watching the donkey? Matter of fact, the only time we even see the donkey mentioned at the beginning, where it started, the donkey was the carrier.
Mm-hmm.
He was the burden bearer. So he probably carried the load of firewood out to Moriah,
Mm-hmm.
because at that point is where Abraham took the wood off the donkey and loaded it onto Isaac. So he carried the wood, and he might have carried a few other things. We don't know. But the donkey's job was to be the burden bearer, the carrier. And so, what if you didn't have the donkey? Just left him out. We won't have him long. We don't need the donkey.
Wouldn't have a burden carrier.
Well, who's going to carry it if he's not going to? I mean, that's what his job is.
Yeah.
So we won't be able to haul the wood. What'll happen? It'll all fall apart, won't it?
The story wouldn't be complete.
Yeah. And the two servants, the only job we know they had to do was watch the donkey while Abraham and Isaac went up the hill. What if those servants went to sleep and let the donkey get away? Would that matter?
Yeah, I'd leave
Well,
in the story.
we're putting a what if there because
Right.
they didn't do that. But
Right.
if they had, now, usually when you see two of anything, they're basically the same thing. I mean, we've got two servants. That's all we know about them. So, as far as we're concerned, they're equal, aren't they? Two guys, two women, two guys, probably men, most likely. Could have been young guys, could have been old guys. We don't know anything about them except there was two of them. They had a job to do, and as far as we know, they did it. But usually when you see two of something, it's looking at the Lord's people.
Mm-hmm.
And we would think, well, who's the most important one in that story?
We would say, I don't know. That's a tough one because you got Abram and
Okay.
Isaac.
Well, first of all, of course, if we took it from a complete thing, we'd have to say, well, God was the most important one there. But from a human point of view,
A runaway cart over there.
where you see? Oh, yeah. I'm going to start this thing again, boy.
Yeah,
it gets so
it
cold.
gets cold so fast.
So, well, who got all the instruction or the directions?
Abram.
Yeah. Did Isaac know what to do?
Not really.
Did Isaac have any plan in mind or anything? I mean, all he did is he just went with Abraham, didn't he?
Yeah.
And all the servants knew. What did they know about the deal?
Nothing.
Well, they did know something.
Just what they were told.
What were they told?
We're going to go offer sacrifice.
Okay, the boy and I are going to go up to the worship. Those two knew that, didn't they?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
The runaway cart got
Somebody
arrested.
went and got it.
Yeah.
So those two, the two servants knew that Abraham and the boy, they didn't know anything about the sacrifice, though. Because, in fact, they'd be left to believe that both Abram and Isaac would be coming back. That's
Yeah.
what he told them.
Yeah.
They had no reason to believe that there would be a sacrifice involving Isaac. They had no reason to know that. In fact, there was no question. They did not ask Abraham about it. What did either one of those two servants say ever in the story? Did they ask a question or say anything?
No.
We don't know one thing about them except that they were brought along to watch the donkey.
Yeah.
It's the only thing we know for sure about, and that Abraham told them to stay there with him.
I've never even heard anybody talk about them
Yeah.
besides you.
But, well, and we say, well, they must not be very important.
That's usually what we do.
Yeah. So what part of God's actions is the least important?
There is none.
You can't use the word least with God, can you?
Right.
There's nothing that God does ever that is least of anything.
Right.
He doesn't have everything God does needs to be done, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And if it weren't done, it would in fact affect the entire operation, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Everything, you know, a lot of big campaigns, wars, and things like that. Maybe one guy was assigned some little job, and it would seem like it didn't amount much, but unless he did that one right, the whole thing would collapse. We have things like that sometimes. So now with humans, of course, we do a lot of stuff that's not necessary. But does God ever do anything that isn't necessary?
No.
You can't do that with God. God does what needs to be done. Every word he put down needs to be said. You know, when the Lord told Satan, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds. Well, which word that comes out of God do we not need? He said we need every word that comes from him, doesn't he? Mm-hmm. So, you know, that's the way that is. So here's these two servants. All we know about them, their job was to keep an eye on the donkey, but the donkey also had an important part of it. But of course, what we see is that Isaac was going to be a figure and a type of the coming Messiah, and the ram that was caught in the brush would be a sacrifice to represent that. But each thing had its thing to do. So when you think about it, if the two guys represent the Lord's people, what did the Lord do all the sacrifice for anyway? He just likes being a sacrifice. That way he did it. Why did the Lord present himself as a sacrifice?
To be the first fruit so that we would know
So
what
that
it's like.
and who are we?
All those who would follow his
The two
way.
servants.
Yeah.
Without the two servants, there's no purpose for the rest of it, is there?
Yeah, that's
So
right.
if nothing else, our position might be just to be the ones who needed salvation, isn't it?
Yeah.
He said, I came to seek and save the lost.
Yeah.
So the whole purpose of God coming is because of the lost. So you could say our lost position is the purpose for why he came, isn't it?
Yeah.
Does that mean that we are, by being lost, that makes us the good guys?
No. We're just playing a role.
It just means we're here and we need him, and so that's why he came.
Yeah.
If we didn't have a need, would there be any need for salvation? If we had no need, or if we weren't what we are, there would be no reason for the Lord to come to the earth.
Yeah.
But he came because that, and of course, love is the one that gives the answer to every question, doesn't it? I mean,
Yeah.
you remember when the Ethiopian that Philip met in the wilderness, why did the Lord send Philip clear out there in the middle of nowhere to meet one guy, an Ethiopian?
That's what was needed at the time.
Yeah, and of course, there again, it's another parable. It's a picture of why does God care enough about one guy to interrupt the big schedule at Jerusalem and send Philip down there to meet that one guy?
Because of love.
Yeah, and we can't even imagine how great that is. Remember Peter's vision of the animals, or the unclean animals in the nets that came down 3 times, and then ultimately going with those 3 soldiers up to meet Cornelius, the centurion. Why was that necessary? Cornelius is a Roman soldier. I mean, got lots of Roman soldiers. Many of them died without God. Mm-hmm. Why did he go after Cornelius? Why'd that
He was
matter?
seeking him. He was seeking the Lord.
Well, yeah, and so the Lord responded to him.
Yeah.
But was there a purpose in all that beyond just saving that guy?
Well, it saved his family too, and
Okay.
and it showed Peter. It showed Peter.
Yeah.
There's something to this Gentile thing.
Do you think that Cornelius, way back then, had any thought that for 2,000 years people all over the world would be hearing about what the Lord did for him?
No.
So, how much effect does Cornelius have on the world?
Well,
Quite a bit, huh?
quite a bit. Yep.
Yes.
He's one of the characters.
In fact, when Peter went up there to see him, did Peter have any idea why he's doing this?
Not really.
It
Not
says
until he stepped across
all the way up
threshold.
there, he's just wondering what was that net full of wild animals. That's so. God said you do not eat that stuff, and then He tells me to eat it. So
Yeah.
what's going on here? He
I'm
says
so
don't eat
confused.
something, and He tells me to do it, and he was just one confused guy, don't you
Yeah,
think?
yeah.
Now, was the Lord trying to play games with Peter?
No.
But He's saying, I'm going to teach you something that you would never have gotten.
You never got it. Yeah.
And of course, when he
Never would.
when he got to Cornelius, remember, he had never set foot in a Gentile house because that was forbidden by the
Right.
Torah, wasn't it?
Right.
And if the Pharisees were teaching that principle, you don't set foot in a Gentile house, they'd probably throw a few extra words in with the word Gentile, don't
Yeah.
you think?
Yeah, they would.
Gentile, scum of the earth, dogs, or some
Yeah.
obscene word or something
Yeah.
to describe what a Gentile is. They hated him, and they figured no Gentile could ever be one of the Lord's people because they are dogs. Gentile, they're scum of the earth. And so when Peter goes up there, he just couldn't get it. And so he gets up to Cornelius' house, and he'd never done that before. How do you think he felt when he's standing in front of a Gentile's house?
This is what he thought. He said, well, I guess I'm going to go into this Gentile's house, but at least I don't have to eat all those animals.
Well, now he was an Orthodox Jew, Peter was, and he would be thinking, all my life I've been taught you don't eat those unclean animals, and you don't associate with Gentiles,
Right.
and you never enter a Gentile's house.
Yeah.
But here I am standing in front of a Gentile. Why am I here? Because God said go with them.
Yeah.
And I don't understand. I can't figure this one out. I don't know what to do.
Yeah.
So finally he gets to the house, and Cornelius meets him. And now Peter do you think he would voluntarily ever talk to a Roman soldier?
Not voluntarily.
Why not?
Well, he's already shown that he was afraid of him
Why would he be afraid of him?
because he thought he was next
Next for what?
for crucifixion.
Yeah, that's what the Romans been busy doing lately,
Yeah.
crucifying people. And not only that, but even just Roman oppression. They were taxing the living daylights out of them. They were making them bow down to the Caesar, and they were forbidding, they were tyrannical oppressors.
Mm-hmm.
So Peter had plenty of reason to be afraid of him. But the Lord had told him, don't be afraid of this guy. I've sent him. You do this. But God did not explain to him why. Just do it. So sometimes, these are all things. Does God have an obligation to explain to us every reason for everything
No.
He tells us to do? So
It's
anyway,
just a pleasure when he does.
but when Peter got there, then he said to Cornelius, may I ask why you sent for me? Now, that's the way it's written in English, and I have no reason to doubt that. That would sound pretty polite, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
He didn't say, what do you want with me? He didn't
Yeah.
May I ask why you sent for me? That's a quite respectful way to ask a question. And what did Cornelius answer him? The question was, may I ask why you sent for me? What's the answer?
Oh, he said,
Was he told? Did he have some kind of a word from the Lord to go
Yeah,
after him?
he told him to send guys down to Joppa to get Peter. Yeah. But he gave Peter an answer. The answer was, I just want you to tell me whatever God's given you to tell me.
Yeah.
Well, what had Peter been thinking about for 3 days?
How confused he was.
What's going on with that animal deal, and why am I going to see a Roman soldier, and
What's going on?
what in the world's going on? But Cornelius said, I want you to tell me what God has given you to tell me. And Peter could say, he hadn't told me to tell you anything. I don't know what's going on. But it says when he stepped into his house, the first time he's ever done this in his life, what was he doing when he stepped into the Gentile's house?
He was accepting.
Well, yes.
He was showing him he wasn't better than he was.
But all his life he'd been taught, you never do this. So when he did it, what was he doing?
He was breaking a barrier.
Yeah, and he was saying, I've been taught wrong all these years. Something was wrong. Now, the Tanakh did not tell him not to associate with. In fact,
It was just
said,
a rabbinic teaching.
you are to be a light for the Gentiles.
Yeah.
You're to bring the truth to them. But the Pharisees, or the legalistic teachers, rabbis, told him that meant you can't even associate. You can't talk to them. You can't go around. They made that stuff up. That's part of that.
Because when they made the hedge kept getting bigger and wider and larger.
So Peter suddenly realized something, and all of a sudden he got the answer to the wild animals, or the unclean. And he said, now I see that I am not to call any man unclean. Up until that point, what would he call a Roman soldier?
Unclean.
Unclean. An unclean. You. In other words, it had nothing to do with food. It had to do with his attitude towards the Gentiles, wasn't it? So now he's going to tell Cornelius, a Gentile, who the Lord is. That's what he did. What did Philip tell the Ethiopian?
He said that it's been given. Well, the Ethiopian quoted Isaiah.
Okay, what was the Ethiopian's question?
Is this about the prophet, or is this about...
Yeah. So literally saying, who's Isaiah talking about?
Yeah, exactly.
And Philip's answer?
Well, he's talking about Yeshua, right?
Yes. So he explains to him Yeshua. Now, this Philip, or this Ethiopian, I mean, he was obviously a Jew. He's from Ethiopia, but he's a Jew. You need Jews everywhere.
Yeah.
How do you know he was a Jew?
I don't know he's a Jew.
I can almost guarantee he was a Jew.
Yeah?
Because he went to Jerusalem for Passover.
Okay.
Why would an Ethiopian go to Jerusalem for Passover if he isn't a Jew? That's for Jews, isn't it? In fact, they were commanded to come there. That's one of the 3 feasts. They were required to go there every year. So the Ethiopian went there. I believe he went there because he was a Jew obeying the rule. And that was right out of the Torah. All right, not only that, but he had a Torah scroll. Now, you can't go to Walmart and buy a Torah scroll for $10.
No.
What do you think a Torah scroll costs?
It was a lot.
Sometimes he said like 2 years' wages, to buy one, because they had to be meticulously hand copied. If there was an error made, they scrapped the whole thing and start over again. They could not make a mistake. Imagine the thousands of hours it took a scribe to even make one of them. And so if you wanted to buy one, it would cost you a bundle. Well, why did the Ethiopian own one?
Because he was a man of God.
And he was serious enough about it, he's willing to spend whatever it took to get one. So now he's reading it on the way home. Obviously, he can read Hebrew. It's written in Hebrew. An Ethiopian Gentile would not likely know how to read Hebrew, would he? Right. That wasn't written in Ethiopian.
You don't think it could have been an LXX or anything?
It was written in Hebrew. They all were. But he can read it. he can read the words, but he can't understand them. I mean, he could define them in a dictionary definition, but his question wasn't, what does the word mean? But he says, who is the prophet talking about here? Mm-hmm. Because in the writing of Isaiah 53, it does not give a specific name of it. It just says, he was wounded for our... Who is he, you know? So the Ethiopian didn't know that, but why did he even ask the question?
Because he wanted to know.
He wants to know. And so, did he pray that God would send Philip down to meet him?
Could have. He might not have had any imagination how it would be, but he was certainly...
Well, all we know is he was trying to learn. He wanted to learn. Mm-hmm. He literally, by his action of studying it and reading it and spending the money on it and the time to go up there, and even traveling, you know, it's about 2,500 miles, something like that, from the capital of Ethiopia to Jerusalem. And he was a government official, so he'd probably come from the capital there. But 2,500 miles or whatever over wild desert roads. Is there any risk or any danger or any?
Yeah.
I mean, and it'd be a long, hard trip. Imagine in a riding in a chariot pulled by some horses or something, not very fast, not very comfortable, and he could be risky. He was probably had some money. He could be at risk from robberies. I mean, but he did it. Why did he do it?
He's seeking the Lord.
Because it really mattered to him.
Mm-hmm. And
so he went up there. Now, the other thing, he is a eunuch.
Mm-hmm.
And as a eunuch, he's not going to be able to go into the temple.
Right.
Because they would be forbidden. And you read in another place that says the Lord made it so even a eunuch. But in that case, he would be rejected. So after all that expense and time and risk and everything else, and the weariness of a long, long, hard trip, then to be kicked out of the temple or denied entrance to it by self-righteous Pharisees, I can picture him going back confused and angry and resentful and
trying to figure out what that passage meant.
Yes, and trying to get an answer. Access. But we know that he was serious about it, and he really wanted that answer. So when Philip met him, he explains to him, of course, that he's talking about Yeshua HaMashiach. And of course, then they miraculously came to a stream of water out there in that burn-up, dry desert. No water is anywhere out there, but there was that day. And so he said, they would not allow me to do a ceremonial washing at the temple. How about here? Mm-hmm. So really what he was doing here was what he expected to do at the temple. They always took a ceremonial washing. Mm-hmm. It's called baptism, and of course the modern evangelicals think that's something different, you know, but it was just a ceremonial Jewish washing. But now they can do it. So they did. And then after that, Philip left him, or was taken away, and the Ethiopian went on, but he was a changed man then, wasn't he? Mm-hmm. Now, did he become the Lord's man at that point?
He was already the Lord's man.
I think so. But he was the Lord's man filled with confusion and fear and anger and resentment and you know, a feeling of, now what? You know, I don't know what to do. But he didn't quit. He was digging. And so now he goes on his way rejoicing. So at least outwardly, at least by his attitude and experience, he is a changed man, isn't he? Mm-hmm. So when he got back to Ethiopia, what would he be talking about to everybody he meets?
his new new venture in life.
Yes. And so in all that, you know, for us, here we are, the Goyim, unless we could read the Hebrew, how would we know any of those stories or anything about any of them?
Well, they've been revealed.
How?
Through the Lord.
Did the Lord come down to you like He did to Abraham and just tell you what all that meant? Where'd you get it?
He's put the Aleph Bait together.
You got it out of the written Torah, didn't
Yeah.
you? That's how you got it. So we do need it. And that doesn't mean that that's how we get to be the Lord's people, but it's how we can begin to understand some of the things He's done. It doesn't, it's not that in the heart attitude, we've been given a change of heart from that inward writing of the new covenant that gives us an attitude toward God where I want to know the truth. And the Lord said, okay, I'll tell you this story about the Ethiopian. When I learned that, wow, that gives me a better idea about Peter going to Cornelius or any of the others, So there's a purpose for the Tanakh. And all these letters and their meaning and the numbers and their meaning. So when we see these things written, and I was mentioning to somebody, people read a lot of these numbers, like the number 7, and they 7, yeah, so I read 7 or something, just skim right over it, never pay much attention to it. But, when the one who had studied the Torah like they did, and they still do, if they came to a number 7, for example, in the first sentence of the Bible, which is Bereshit bara Elohim et Hashamim ve'eretz, there is 7 words in that sentence.
Yeah.
And there are 28 letters in it. That's 4 times 7. Now, some people would call that Bible trivia. So there's 7 letters. So there's 7 words. So there's 28 letters. Bible trivia. You think that's a good way to describe that?
No.
How much Bible trivia is there?
Nothing's trivial.
If you say something's trivial and you say, God, you're just playing games with us. We don't need trivia. But you see, if somebody really understood what 7 means, if they read there's 7 words in that first sentence, what is 7 about?
Completion.
Well, what's complete? 7 is God.
Revelation of God, yeah.
7 is another way of describing God. There's 28 letters. That's 4 times 7. What's 4? What's the letter for? The 4th letter.
Dalet.
Dalet. What's Dalet?
A door.
The Lord says, I'm the door.
Mm-hmm.
So 4 times 7 is like saying the Lord Himself is a multiple of the perfect God. Doesn't it say somewhere that Yeshua is the fullness of the Godhead bodily? It's like 4 times a figure of God. We talk about the 4 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, is a fourfold definition of Yeshua, who is the fullness of the Godhead. Would it be fair to say that He is 4 times 7?
4 times 7.
He's the fourfold figure who is the fullness of the Godhead. If the Godhead could be described by the number 7, and He is the fourfold being to represent that, and He's like seeing being 4 times the 7. Can you see that?
Mm-hmm.
He's the 28th, which is 4 times 7, because the Lord is a fourfold being showing us the perfection of who God is. So anyone who is a real student of the Torah, if he read that, instead of just skimming over it, he might say, wow, that very first sentence in the Torah is a picture of Yeshua, who is a fourfold definition of who God is. Of course, how many people reading Genesis 1:1 would get that out of it?
Right.
1 out of 144 million is the exact number. But what will the rest of them do with those 7 and 28ths and 4? What would they? That's Bible trivia.
Mm-hmm.
And here the very first sentence is telling you who Yeshua is, that he is the fullness of the Godhead in a bodily form, and that he is the creator of all things. But, you know, how are you going to get that? How would you know that? Or how would you ever hear of it even?
It's only through revelation.
And how do you get that revelation?
God himself.
Just like how the Ethiopian get the revelation. He sought it. He dug for it like hidden treasure. And the Lord says, you dig for truth like the hidden treasure, you will find it.
Mm-hmm.
That's not, he doesn't say you might find it or hope you'll find it. He said you will. That's a guarantee from God. But by implication, if you don't want to take the time or bother with it to dig for it, well, I can promise you this, you will not find it.
Right.
And so most people don't find it, do they?
Yeah.
And it's not because they're bad people or they don't want it. It's just that they're, you know, I see people, they'll show up at church meetings and they'll sit there and listen to some guy yelling a sermon at them, and then they all get up and leave. Well, that was a beautiful sermon. Let's go have lunch, and then we'll come back next Sunday. See you next week.
Mm-hmm.
And what do they do between now and next week? I mean, nothing bad, nothing evil about them, but they're not digging for it like hidden treasure. And
You often get what you look for.
yeah.
If you stop looking, you don't get anything more.
And if it isn't important enough to you to even take the time for it, well, the Lord had a way of not forcing himself on anybody. You know, in Revelation 3, where he's talking to the Laodicean church,
Mm-hmm.
that's part of the Lord's people, of course. He says, look, I'm standing at the door and I'm knocking. And with the very next word in the English translation, I'm standing at the door and knocking. The next word is...
Open?
No. Not the word.
Listen?
Nope. Behold, I stand at the door and knock. Next word.
Here?
Oh,
No. How did I say that?
it's a sentence. I'm standing at the door knocking. Finish the sentence.
I don't know why when I get with you, sometimes my brain turns off. I can't answer.
Okay, I'll tell you. The next word is if.
Okay.
If any man hears my voice
Okay.
and will open the door, I will come in and sup with him and he with me. That's what it, in the King James Version, that's what it is. If. Now, when you say if, what does that mean?
It means...
Is he forcing himself on anybody?
No.
Is he commanding anybody to do anything?
No. But he is laying out conditions.
Yeah, and the word if means you have to choose.
Right.
Do you want to do it? You want it or not?
Right.
Now, in the Shabbat, you know, the 7 days you end up with Shabbat. How did the Pharisees interpret that word?
Don't do anything.
Don't do anything. Literally anything, right?
Yeah.
A guy who had been lame for 38 years, the Lord told him, take up your little old mat, which is just a little tiny rug or something he laid on, weighed 14 ounces.
And the Pharisees said, don't you dare.
Well, they would literally say, he'll have to die for that because the penalty for doing that work is death. Yeah. And so will the one who told you to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So what the Pharisees' definition of Shabbat was, you're not allowed to do anything.
Mm-hmm.
Literally. I mean, if you took them full and said what they believe, you'd have to stop your heart from beating. I mean, you couldn't even move. You couldn't blink your eyes. You couldn't say anything. I mean, they literally shut you down. And so the Lord's made a statement, is it better to give life on the Sabbath or kill? Is it better to do good or evil? So if he says, all right, which is better, to give life or to kill?
That's a choice.
Your choice.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, what's your answer? Shall I give life or shall I kill?
And it's also a tricky choice because you can't really answer to take life.
Well, when he says, when the Lord tells you two of anything, it's this or that, then you have to choose, don't you?
Mm-hmm.
Anything. It doesn't matter. If you come to a fork in the road, you got to make a decision.
Mm-hmm.
Shall I go that way or that way?
Mm-hmm.
Anytime if somebody says, you ask them how to do something, and you say, well, there's two ways you could do this.
Mm-hmm.
All right, what do you have to do?
Choose.
Which way shall we go? Or anytime there's two of anything in front of you, you must choose. Isn't that right?
Mm-hmm.
So when he said to the Pharisee, is it better to give life or take life on the Sabbath?
Mm-hmm.
They asked him, okay, what do you say?
Mm-hmm.
Now, what they said was Shabbat is about what you cannot do.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very negative view. All they thought about is what, did they ever tell anybody to do anything on the Sabbath?
No.
They just said,
Don't
you
do
can't
this,
do
don't
this,
do this,
you
don't
can't
do
do that, you must not do this, you must not do that. Everything was negative. But the Lord didn't do that. He said, pick up your mat and walk. Go take this mud, wash it off in the pool of Siloam, and then go to the temple and present yourself to the priest. Do that. On and on, he told them, on Sabbath, here's what you to do. And now remember, he said there's two choices, either take life or give life or take life, heal or kill. Which would he choose to do?
Yeshua?
Yeah,
Give life.
give life. And when you're giving life, you're doing something, aren't you?
Mm-hmm.
But when you're taking life away, you're not doing something. You're stopping. You're shutting life down. You're stopping it. You're putting an end to it. So his way of interpreting Shabbat is not what you're not allowed to do, but here's what you must do in order to experience the best of life.
Mm.
So Shabbat is not a day to stop doing things, it's to start doing what's right.
Mm-hmm.
So the Lord said, my Father's always working and I'm always working. Remember the verse that says, now is the accepted time. Today is the day of salvation. So we only live today. You know, the Hebrew word for today is hayom, which means the day.
Mm-hmm.
You can't live tomorrow. That's just an idea.
Mm-hmm.
You can't live yesterday. That's done with. When do you live?
Hayom.
Only on hayom. This is every day is hayom. So what day is the day of salvation?
Hayom.
So what does the Lord do on the day of salvation?
Saves.
So what day is Shabbat?
Is today.
Every day.
Yeah.
But you see, the Pharisees, they only limited to this one day a week, the seventh. They called it the seventh day, but Shabbat day, and all it meant was don't stop, don't do anything, stop living, stop being anything. You can't start a fire. You couldn't walk over and snap on a light switch, according to their view.
Mm-hmm.
You couldn't start your car. You couldn't even, what could you do? You couldn't do a thing.
Mm-hmm.
So their idea of Shabbat is literally just quit living on this day.
Mm-hmm.
Just stop. That's not what Shabbat means. It does mean, by definition, it means cease. But it doesn't mean cease living. It means cease doing your regular work. So what do we do for 6 days?
Regular work.
Regular work. So he says, you're a farmer, you plow your fields, you harvest, or you're a fisherman, you fish, whatever you do. If you're a Gideon, you chop down trees.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you're a fireman, you put out fires. But on this day of Shabbat, you stop doing that regular stuff, and what do you do on Shabbat?
Do something life-giving.
Yeah, do life-giving. So he gives an example. If one of you Pharisees has an ox and he falls in a pit on Sabbath, you'll get him out. Would that be a violation?
No.
But it may be the hardest work you ever did, and very dangerous too.
Mm-hmm.
You get a big ox that's fallen into a pit. Maybe he's wounded, or if nothing else, he's sure scared, and he's feels helpless.
Swollen and
yeah, and you jump down in there with him to try to get him out. He might gore you, or something, or even at the best. How do you get a 1,500-pound ox out of a ditch? You know, I mean, it'd be terrible hard work. At the end of the day, you'd be exhausted from the work and maybe injured and full of scars and everything else. But have you violated Sabbath?
no.
No, because it didn't say don't do anything. It just said don't do. You know, getting oxen out of a ditch is not your regular work. That's emergency. See, so. I say that on the day at Sabbath or Shabbat in Genesis, the whole creation fell in the ditch. So what does the Lord do?
Works to get it out.
Goes to rescuing his creation. And is he violating the Sabbath? But when it came to observing Sabbath, would the Lord properly obey Sabbath or recognize it?
Yeah.
Yes. And every other feast. He went to all the feast days. He went to Passover, to Shavuot and Sukkoth and Yom Kippur and all of them.
Mm-hmm.
He would do them exactly properly, the way the Torah says to do them. And did he ever tell anybody you don't need to do that anymore?
No.
But what he come up with is that those things are a parable of the finished work, which is him putting the Torah in your heart. So if you really get this within your heart, you are observing all these feasts and Day of Atonement and Sabbath and all of them. But it won't show on the outward because it's within the heart, you see. But of course the Pharisees and the legalistic believers even now still think you either got to do them all or I got to say they've all been made obsolete, so we don't do them anymore, you know. And you know, it's what's wrong? Why do people think that way? Freezing again.
Yeah, it is. It's cold. Well, I think they think that way because the Lord hadn't completed the Torah within their heart.
Yeah, or so. Well, it's just like Peter, you know. He was an observant Jew. He observed all the feasts and everything and obeyed them. But he had a terrible misunderstanding about the Gentiles, didn't he? And
He thought they were the fish that were supposed to be thrown out.
yeah, really, exactly. So what was his problem? Why did he think like that?
Because he was a product of the culture that had skewed what the Gentiles really were.
Yeah, who told him those things?
Well, the rabbis did.
Yeah. In fact, where is it in Ezekiel maybe? Where the Lord talks about the false shepherds.
Yeah, Ezekiel.
Yeah, he says, you've misled my people.
Yeah.
And you caused them to think things that just simply aren't true.
Yeah.
And and of course, since that's what you teach them, then they believe it. It's not because they don't want to know the truth, but you're telling them that the truth is all these things, you know, which is wrong. And I think that's why a lot of people who are sincere believers and want to do right have rejected Israel. They've done this replacement theology, and they've said, oh, that stuff is all obsolete, and
Yeah.
some of them won't even read what they call the Old Testament because they think that's all obsolete. And they think somehow that the apostles wrote a whole new Bible that's different from the old one. Well, that's what the modern Jews believe, many of them, you know. In fact, I heard a rabbi just the other day, I was listening to him, he said, The Gentiles, they took their so-called Christian Bible and took one of our Tanakh and glued it on the back of it and said, now this is the whole Bible. And without their Gentile Bible on here, then we don't have the whole Bible. Well, he was right, wasn't he?
Yeah, in a way, yeah.
I mean, that's exactly what happened. And now I'm not rejecting the concept of what it's too bad they put that word New Testament, Old Testament, but putting the New Testament on the old one, I'll take the whole thing. But we're not saying we're adding something to what you guys already had. In fact, all we're doing is saying we're looking at apostles who understood the Tanakh, and we're just explaining it to the people. Mm-hmm. They weren't adding anything. They weren't changing anything. They weren't doing away with anything. They weren't making anything obsolete. They just simply said, this is what it was talking about. When Philip went down and told the Ethiopian about Isaiah, did he say, well, let me tell you what the Apostle John says? Or let me tell you about the book of Hebrews or something? What did he tell him?
Just told him about Yeshua
and where did he get it?
Scriptures.
This is what Isaiah was talking about.
That's what happened when they were walking down the road in Emmaus.
Yeah. He talked to them about Isaiah. And in Emmaus
the
there,
Scriptures.
says beginning with Moses and through the whole thing. Yeah. So which part of the Tanakh did he talk to them about?
All of it.
Yeah, it went all the way through it. I don't know how long it took, but he must have touched here and there. But beginning with Moses would put you right back to Genesis, wouldn't it? And then go on around and up to go to the end of it.
And Yeshua could have used one sentence for each application.
That's true.
Who knows?
But at any point did he say, let me tell you about what Matthew has to say?
No.
Or what the Apostle Peter is going to say, Never even touched on that.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with what they said, but all they'd be doing is the same thing, just telling them this is what the prophets of old times said. And
I think it's that thing about what you're looking for. I think people are looking for some guidebook for religion, and once they get their answer, they shut it down and say, "Okay, this is the answer." So, no more looking.
Yeah. Well, and when the rabbis tell these Jews that you can't read the New Testament, they're putting a fear into them that this is intended to draw you away from the truth.
Yeah.
And of course they're wrong about it. And chances are that most of them who teach that have never read any of it, or very little.
Yeah.
And,
not enough for an understanding.
Not enough to even see. In fact, I was listening to one of those One for Israel testimonies. The guy said, of course, he'd been taught that all his life, that you don't dare touch the New Testament.
Yeah.
But he got curious about it because he kept hearing people talking about it. And he was in a library and he decided you couldn't buy one in Jerusalem. In none of the bookstores they have that. But he found one in a library. And he said he was standing there and he was looking around to make sure no other Jews were watching. But he did pull one of them off the shelf. He was just curious. He wanted to see what it said. And he started right at the beginning of Matthew.
So this ain't a Gentile book. This is a Jew book.
What's the first part of Matthew about?
The genealogies.
The genealogy that goes all the way back to King David, who is the king. Yeah. Matthew's the book of the king. And they explained, giving all these Hebrew, by their Hebrew names and everything. And the man said, this is not anything like what he expected, and he just was amazed that this thing is just written about the genealogy of King David, and he was amazed by that, and before long he began to really realize that he'd been taught wrong.
Yeah.
And so my guess is the same thing with many evangelicals who call themselves Christian. A lot of them been just taught wrong. That's all there is to it. And
how many people that were really taught right?
A few, a very few.
Yeah. It's like, I can point out the things that I wasn't taught that were right, but then again, I think the Lord is faithful in His answering when we seek.
Well,
because He'll give us what we seek, and if we stop seeking, then that's what we'll have.
Yeah.
We'll have just the portion that we
that we got in front of us in our understanding.
Wasn't that light right there the last week we were here? That one that looks like an airplane landing light,
I
digging
don't
you
know.
right in the eye.
I bet you there's more than one.
Well, that one there, that's a welding rod, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah, well, I met a few guys, not very many, that really began to seem to really get the idea. But
And you know what, Jim? I'm sorry, you said but. I'll let you finish.
well, I have met a few that seem to get it. It just seems like so many folks, and I don't mean they mean to be wrong, but there's something called inbreeding.
Yeah.
Where does the modern teacher get his in? He got it from some guy that taught him, and where'd that guy get his?
Yeah,
From
same
somebody went
place,
back,
yeah.
and it just keeps going back and back to somewhere they got screwed up. So, but they, like I keep hitting on our old friend Irwin. He wasn't a bad guy, but you look at what he taught, and it just took the heart out of it, didn't it?
Yeah. Well, yeah. I heard. Yeah, I heard that kind of thing my whole life, and where you literally take the heart out of it because you don't consider the heart because you only consider the mind.
Yeah.
Because that's the important instrument in that frame of thinking is, well, we got to logic our way out of this thing.
Yeah. And they by and large, not always, but many of them reject Israel as Lord. They say the Lord is done with Israel.
Yeah.
They lost out, and but you read one of my favorite books reading is Zechariah. Zechariah says, I'm going to bring them back.
Yeah.
And I'm going to send a spirit of supplication. What does supplication mean?
To fill in what was missing.
Yeah, well,
To supply.
yeah, I suppose so. And it comes down to being a very sincere seeking of the Lord, a prayer. And then he says they'll look on the one they have pierced and they'll mourn for him like an only son. And what does that tell you about their feeling toward the one they pierced?
Sorrow.
And like for an only son, meaning he's the one that we killed him, and he was our real only son. I mean,
And that's what you see in the repentance in Acts 2.
Yeah, and he said they'll do that. And then, of course, it ends up with just the Lord restoring all this stuff. There's one place where it says, even if they've gone to the farthest corners of the world, I'll seek them there and bring them back,
Yeah.
And, of course, the fulfillment of that all really began just in the last few decades, in our life. And they're pouring into Israel all over the place now. Not quite so much right now because this virus has been thrown out that seems to put the brakes on everything. I wonder where that came from, but it's there. But even that's not going to stop what the Lord has said. And so he said they're coming back. And of course, when Mark Twain went over there in the 1880s somewhere, he said the Messiah will never come back here because nobody would ever come to this miserable place. He said it's the worst place on earth. And he was probably looking at it pretty rightfully that it was just a burn-up desert over there, hardly a living thing. And every country that ever occupied it, the Greeks and the Romans and the Babylonians and the Ottomans and whoever else, the British, they never could get anything out of the land. They never could just go. But as soon as the Jews got back there, boy, it just starts just thriving,
Yeah.
as though the land was waiting for them. And when they came, it said, okay, we're ready to work,
As if that's a theological statement.
Yes. And
I love it.
and there they come, and now they just produce them, not only abundant crops, but all kinds of industrial work and medical things and everything,
Don't you think that if the dispensational theologians would ever just connect the dots, that as
as it is with Israel, so it is with us.
Yeah.
Wouldn't they change their mind? I think that's what happened to John Hagee.
Yeah.
John Hagee came to a point, he was an evangelical preacher, and all of a sudden he said, wait a minute, I must love Israel.
Yeah.
And he started loving Israel.
Yeah. Well, you know, I don't know if they figured out logically as much as there's a heart attitude that says to God, I want the truth and I'm willing to accept it, even if it costs me my whole lifetime of theology, you know.
Yeah.
If I have to scrap the whole pile, I'll do that. But you know, it's really sad that when people won't realize that, how much they miss of truth, you know. I don't think that means they can't have salvation or anything, but
some of the letters might be missing.
yeah, that's certainly true. And as a result, there's got to be some kind of a loss, you know.
Yeah.
But it's still very sad that in Israel there's a huge rejection of truth by many Jews. But I think it's because the rabbis just taught that, you know. And I know I went for a little while to a Hebrew class I was trying to learn several years ago, and some woman was teaching it, but her attitude was so just cynical and
Really?
yeah.
Why did she learn it then?
What's that?
Why did she ever learn it then?
Well, she was Jewish, and she was teaching Hebrew, you know. And I wanted to learn some, and they were nice enough people, but I didn't see any real sense of recognizing who the Lord is there. It was just almost a sort of a cynical attitude about everything, you know, and not a really nice lady. But
did I ever tell you about a plane trip that I had one time?
I don't remember.
Where I don't remember where I was going or where I was coming
Warm
from.
up for a minute.
Yeah. I was flying somewhere, and I had an old Bible sitting on my lap, and I was reading the book of Esther. And
You were reading what?
the book of Esther.
Oh, Esther. Okay, yeah.
And there was a cute girl. I was a single man at the time. There was a cute young lady sitting beside me, and I was thrilled when she started talking to me. But she was Jewish.
Yeah.
And she said, I see that you're reading the book of Esther.
Really?
I said, yes. She said, well, I'm Jewish. And I said, oh, really? I said, tell me all about it. And she said, I don't really know much about it.
They don't.
She doesn't. She said, I don't know a thing about it.
Yeah.
She said, all I know is that story used to be really fun when I was a kid.
Yeah.
She said, what we would do is we would put on a stage show, and every time Haman would come out, we would boo and hiss.
Booing him and throwing popcorn and junk at him. Yeah. Yeah.
And she said that was a great amount of fun.
Well, that, you know.
And I said, that's fascinating that you're Jewish. And she almost was like offended that I was fascinated by it, because she wanted to forget about it.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, what a waste of a good-looking girl. Because she was cute to me, and I was happy to be talking to her. But
Well, you know, they do to their own feast days, Yom Kippur and all these other Sukkot and Passover. They just become
a Super Bowl
party times.
Yeah.
And so they, just like they do here with Christmas and Easter and all these phony things, they go out and spend tons of money on buying stuff and for the holidays. But you know, those were there to show you who Yeshua is. And very rarely do they ever even begin to touch on that.
Yeah.
But look at so-called Christian holidays.
Yeah.
People do the same thing here. Christmas is the biggest business thing of the year for these big stores, they do half their business for Christmas.
Yeah, man.
And what is most of that money spent on?
Stuff we don't need.
Yeah, just decorations or these Christmas gifts of people and toys and Christmas trees and all this kind of junk and special food for it. And people will say, "Did you have a nice Christmas?" "Oh, yeah."
Got
And
lots of stuff.
what did you get? You know, so how much
lots of
time are
stuff.
they thinking about who
The
God
true
is?
giver.
Yeah, and the same thing with
The
Easter.
giver of all good things.
You know, Easter, they put on these special Easter sunrise services and stuff. But there again, it's just mostly a pagan holiday. And, of course, the very name is pagan as can be.
Yeah.
Thanksgiving Day. You know, that was introduced well-meaning to be a day to give special thanks to God for what? But what is Thanksgiving now? Two things.
Stuff yourself with food
And
and football.
football and food.
Yeah.
And, you know, I was just hearing on the news, since this coronavirus has really hit the turkey farmers.
Oh, really?
Because,
Because they don't have anybody to slaughter
well,
the turkeys.
no, they can raise turkeys, but the problem is people can't get together with big families, so now they want little turkeys rather than the big ones. And they used to raise big turkeys, but people aren't buying them now because they can't get a big family together, so they're buying little ones.
How about that?
So,
I didn't hear about that news.
but they're doing that, and of course that's going to cost more money to everybody and stuff. But it comes down to this: how much time is any of them thinking about being thankful to God for anything? It's just our day of gluttony and having our football things, and they fight over who ought to play the football game, who ought to win, and people get, you know, there's more domestic violence over Christmas, they say, than any other holiday.
Yeah.
People get
Depression.
drunk. They're drunk.
Suicides.
Yeah, they're drunk and they're depressed and they're lonely and they're afraid, and so they kill each other
Yeah.
or beat each other up, you know. And you know, and sadly, it's the same story in Israel with the feast days and stuff. Not every one of them. I don't mean that, but you know, what Hanukkah is called, the Feast of Lights.
Yeah.
What's the big deal for them about Hanukkah? What do they think when they do it?
Well, it's like the Jewish Christmas, right?
What does it mean to
Gift
most of them?
giving
And what do they do?
they spin dreidels
And yeah, there's certain foods that are traditional, and they light their candles, and they tell their stories, and it's all great fun, you know.
Yeah.
But you know, the purpose of Hanukkah really was the dedication of the temple. It's called Dedication Day, or it was. Yeah, not day, but it was an 8-day celebration. And of course, theoretically, when after this, the Greeks brought in this abomination of the statue of, what was it, one of their pagan gods. They brought him into the temple to desecrate the temple, and they forced the believers there to offer pigs on sacrifice, and they forbid anybody to observe Sabbath or anything. It could be a death penalty for observing Sabbath. They couldn't have circumcision or any of the Jewish things, and so they finally they drove these guys out. The Maccabees, drove those Greeks out, and they rededicated the temple. And at that time, they only had, according to their tradition, whether it's true or not, anyway, the story is they only could find enough, one little jar of purified olive oil for the menorah. And normally they would have quite a bit there, but the Greeks had dumped all that or done something with it. They found this one little jar of it, and of course it was supposed to be just enough for one day.
Yeah.
But it lasted through the 8 days, and of course they considered that a miracle. Now that may not even be true. It could be just a fiction story. I don't know, but the idea of the dedication was to commemorate that time. And of course, why would you even want to dedicate the temple anyway? Why would you even do it?
To honor God.
Yeah, if you were really sincere about it. But they do their ceremonies and their traditions, and but it's more of a family thing to do, just to bring the family together. You know, people say, our family, we're going to meet for Thanksgiving. They just want to get together with the family, which is okay. But Thanksgiving was not intended to be just to get the family together. It was to be thankful to God.
Yeah.
So the dedication of the temple was not just a time for families to get together and give gifts and eat food or anything else. It was to dedicate something to God, and kind of they got rid of the Greek influence there and think about returning to true godliness. But very few of them think about that. You know, yeah. It's all lost. So.
And it was the same. It was the same thing that we were talking about earlier, that even, you know, the characters, even the festivals and feasts, are all those, they're characters in the alphabet to point to Yeshua.
Every one of them, yeah. So I've really come to see that all the numbers and all the letters are just a way to see who God is, and probably the reason they're written down. If they were just the new covenant written in the heart, but without the written letters, the letters have a purpose of illustrating visibly who the Lord is. So as the more we see of that, the more it becomes real, and so there is a reason for it and a reason to read them and so on. But it just seems like, you know, that's the way. Truth has a way of deteriorating into just paganism if you don't keep looking back to who God is. And He keeps reminding us, you know, that the book of Zechariah means God has remembered, or God remembers. What does He remember? What does God remember?
He remembers His people.
Well, it says specifically He remembers His covenant. You know, when they would make a covenant, if you want some light, you can click that light up. When they make a covenant, they are usually with at least two people, and they would lay out the terms of the covenant, and then they would walk between them.
Yeah.
And they call that cutting a covenant.
Yeah.
And of course, by walking between the two parties, they were both, I would say, that they're both committing themselves to the terms of the covenant. Well, when Abraham was given a covenant from God, remember, Abraham made a sacrifice of 7 entities, 3 animals, and himself, two doves or 2 birds, and God. So there was 7 all in that entity, and he laid it, and he put them on an altar as a sacrifice. And then there was buzzards or something, came down on the sacrifice trying to eat the meat, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And he drove them off. And then he said he laid them out in the rows, like the 2 where they would walk between them. And then this darkness came, just an inky black darkness came over everything. And Abraham was down there, and he saw this lamp walking between the sacrifices.
Yeah.
But Abraham did not walk between them. Only God. God walked through it. So God committed to this covenant, but Abraham did not. Now, Abraham made the offering, but he didn't ever walk through between them like God did. What does that mean? There's a meaning to that. Well, think about this. Even in modern terms.
What does man owe God? You know?
Well, yeah. if we're going to have a contract today, or you're going to buy a piece of land or something, you sign a contract with the two parties.
Yeah.
What if one party violates the contract?
Well, usually it's even Steven thing. It's a balanced contract. It's usually a balanced contract.
Okay, but the terms of contract will say, okay, this guy
You'll do this and I'll do this.
What if one guy violates the agreement, doesn't do it?
It's null and void.
It nulls the whole thing.
Yeah.
If God and Abraham both walked through the covenant and Abraham failed,
It would have been
nullified.
God. Yeah.
Abraham never went through it at all,
Yeah.
but God did.
Yeah.
So God is saying, I am here, and the apostle wrote,
That's why
even-
his faithfulness
Yeah.
is more important.
it says, if we believe not, God continues to be faithful,
'Cause-
because he has walked through the covenant.
Yeah.
But Abraham did not. Now, does that give Abraham the right to not do the right thing? But it says, even if he doesn't do the right thing, that will not nullify, because God never fails. If we had to do the right thing in order to keep the covenant together, the new covenant that we have,
It would fail.
it was a guaranteed failure
Yeah.
if we were required to be right. So thankfully, God is saying, that doesn't give you the excuse to be wrong, but my covenant with you does not depend on your faithfulness.
Yeah.
It depends on God's faithfulness.
Boy, oh boy.
And since it depends only on God's faithfulness, that never gives us the right to be unfaithful.
Right.
But our unfaithfulness does not nullify the contract. If it did, who would have any hope?
Yeah.
In
Gives
fact,
us-
there's a place where it says, if the Lord kept a record of sins, who could stand?
Yeah.
So,
This is like a capstone for everything we've ever talked about.
well, yeah.
We're like covered everything with the completion
Yeah.
of number 7.
Yeah. Oh, while you mention it, if you can reach behind you, there's a stack of paper
Yeah.
right in the middle. Just
Yeah.
bring the whole stack up front. In the middle of those somewhere, that's a hay. There's a Zayin on one of them. Somewhere. There, no. Maybe it's
They're all he's.
okay. Then there's another one back there somewhere.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah,
Another stack.
I think that might be it.
Shiva. Yeah.
Yeah, there's your Zayin. There's the Zayin.
Okay.
down there.
Very
Yeah.
good.
Okay, those are we made extra copies in case
Do
anybody
I have a
shows
hay?
up. Yeah, sure. I
Yeah.
don't know. Take one if you want.
Yeah, I'll just take one
Yeah.
just to make sure.
Now those are very, very minimal.
Yeah.
I picked out a few notes, and there's some various scriptures where things are applied, but just a few thoughts in there. But now that's the back page. The other page is
The front page.
yeah. So that's the number 7 there, which is Shiva. Oh,
Yeah.
we got to talk about Shiva a few minutes. You're not in a hurry, are you?
I don't guess so. Got to complete the work.
Okay, Shiva. Shiva means 7,
Yeah.
and I noticed that Abraham lived in a town called Beersheba.
Uh-huh.
Beer means a well.
Yeah.
So Beersheba either means 7 wells, or can mean the well of 7.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so if you, and of course in those days, Beersheba was just a little village. It wasn't a big city. Most little villages would have one well, wouldn't they?
Yeah.
And they'd build a village around the well. Okay, what if it had 7 wells? That would be unheard of, wouldn't it? I mean,
It would be like paradise
yeah,
of some sort.
But they didn't do that. They didn't make 7 wells. But what if their well had a name, and the well was called the Well of 7? So, okay, you start with beer means the well.
Mm-hmm.
What does 7 mean?
Perfection.
Okay, and 7, I kept saying, that's who God is 7.
Yeah.
All right, so the Lord is sometimes called the Lord of Lords, the King of Kings. What does King of Kings mean?
top of the heap, the only one.
Yeah. Or Lord of Lords.
Yeah.
It means if you took everybody that was ever called the Lord and brought him in, he would just overshadow all of them. None of them would even come up. So if you called your well the Well of Seven.
Well of wells.
What kind of a well would it be?
It's going to be great.
Yeah. So that's what Beersheba really meant. So anyway, when you see the word Shiva, by the way, that's the masculine word. Feminine word for it is Shiva.
Mm-hmm.
Shiva is the masculine way. Shiva. So anyway, so here's Shiva, meaning seven. But again, it keeps going back to things that are absolutely perfect. And sometimes you would see a reference. It'll say something happened from Dan to Beersheba.
Uh-huh.
What does that mean?
What does Dan mean?
Well, Dan means the judge, but Dan was way up in the north in the country, up by Mount Hermon. Beersheba was way down the south.
Stem to stern is what
yeah,
it's
from top to bottom. And Beersheba was about, I forgot, maybe 30, 40, 50 miles south of Jerusalem. And from there to the Suez Canal is this vast burn-up desert. So Beersheba was like the end of civilization. It would literally be called the bottom of the country.
like an oasis.
Yeah, just the very end of the country. But Dan up north, Dan means the judge. Daniel means my God is the judge, or the judge is my God, or something like that. So, and of course, if God is the judge, he judges perfectly and rightly and truly and everything. That's way up the north end. The south end of the country is Beersheba, which would mean literally the end of the world, almost like saying. And even though the name of the well was a great name, the village itself was just as far down away from Dan as you could get in those days. So it's as though when the Lord came to bring salvation, did he come to the good people?
And come to the sinners.
Yeah, he said, I come to save. So instead of coming to up where Dan is at the top of the world, he goes to the very bottom of the world to bring salvation. And of course, so Shiva means seven, but you think from Dan to Beersheba is all of the land of the whole country, in other words, the way it's describing it. But it's saying God came to bring all of it up to himself, all the way from Dan, from the top of the thing clear to the bottom, from the least to the greatest, another way of describing it. And but when you think about all that, it's back to what does Shiva mean? It means things that are right. So salvation takes what was Beersheba, clear down to the bottom of the nothing, the very end of the world, and connects it to Dan, the righteous judge, So that's something about Beersheba, and there's more stuff there, but a lot. Zayin means a plow or a weapon or a sharp sword, or it can mean a tent peg.
Yeah.
What's a tent peg for?
Holding down a tent.
Holds it down so the wind don't blow it away. So Shiva or Zayin can mean what makes you secure in the storm. The Lord talks about a house built, the storm couldn't blow it away or so on. And it also can mean a weapon or a sharp sword. And so says the word of God is like a sharp sword. It's sharper than any human sword. And what does it do? It pierces right to the very heart of the matter. So Zayin means that, you see. It also means a plow. And there's a psalm that says, they plowed my back and made the furrows long, and he's talking about evil forces.
Right.
Which literally, and you take up the Lord, before the crucifixion, they sent him through a vicious flogging. What do you
Yeah.
think he looked like by the time they got done with that?
Like he'd been plowed through.
Yes. And so the plow can not only mean, now I said, if land had feelings, would it like being plowed? If land, what are you doing when you're
violent.
plowing? What are you doing with
You're turning the top and turning it over to the bottom.
ripping it up and turning it over? So the land is being treated just like a poor guy being flogged. You're just ripping him to pieces. And so that Zayin can also mean the efforts of the enemy to cause harm and pain and suffering.
Yeah.
So it just comes out to being a sharp tool. If a sharp tool, if you want to cut something, it's a good thing to have, but it can also be dangerous too. So Zayin is a very powerful force. At the same time, it's both good and evil. Just as Shiva, 7, can mean who God is, it can also mean the efforts of the enemy. When the Lord drove 7 demons out of Mary, that was a 7, but it was evil 7, you see. But so Shiva always means something that's complete and total. It can be totally right or it can be totally wrong, still Shiva. So that's all part of that. So you may see some other thing. There's a few verses worth looking up.
Yeah.
I didn't go into all of them because it takes so much time. But well, what do you think? Are we a good time to quit?
Let's do it.
All right.
We're not going to quit. We're going to keep on going just
Oh,
in another iteration.
Put it on pause.
Yeah.
You want to grab your deal off so it doesn't fall.
Well, hey, how about we switch it? We shift to talking about the actual mathematical number 7s. How about that?
Sure.
Because I think maybe if I tell you what I know, that you might be able to add something or see something that I might not be seeing.
Maybe. I'm not too good at the mathematical thing. You're good at that.
Well, I like it.
Yeah, I know
I
you
find curiosity in it.
do. And that's good.
So, this is how I got started on being fascinated with 7.
Yeah.
They call it reciprocals in 7.
Yeah.
And you might remember reciprocals by basically inverting the numerator and the denominator. If you're doing fractions, you invert the numerator and denominator. That's called the reciprocal.
Okay.
Like the reciprocal of half is 2, because you're flipping the 1 over 2 and making it 2 over 1.
Okay.
So, but the reciprocal of 2 is half. All right, so they call it reciprocals for some reason, but basically I thought it would be fun to take a number and just for fun to get a viewpoint of all the numbers from 1 to 100, to take the number and divide it by 1. Make 1 divided by the number.
Okay.
So basically, here's a way that you can relate to this. You have a sign in your shop that has all the conversions from fractions to decimals.
Yeah. Okay.
It's the same thing. It's because a half is 0.5.
Yeah.
And you know them more than I do by heart because you've worked with them your whole life.
Yeah.
So what I did is I started with 1 over 1 is 1. 1 over 2 is 0.5.
Yeah.
1 over 3 is 0.333333333.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
1 over 4 is 0.25.
Okay.
And then when you keep going, what I wanted to do is look at the patterns. But when I got to 7, I really got tripped up because you probably know all of them 1 through 10, don't you? 1 over 4 is 0.25, 1 over 5 is 0.2.
Yeah, pretty much.
Which is cool because 5 and 2 are a team.
Yeah.
And why is 5 and 2 a team? They're prime numbers.
Okay.
All right, so then you got 6. 1 over 6 is what? 1 over 6 is
I can't remember.
0.15?
Is that it?
No, 1/8 is 125.
No, it's 0.166666666.
Okay.
All right, and 1/7 is the fun one. 1/7 is 0.142857.
Okay.
And then it repeats 142857. The reason it's cool is because 7 doubled is 14, 14 doubled is 28, 28 doubled is 56, but that's not the number, it's 57.
Yeah.
All right, so there's something mysterious going on with that number. Okay, so when you start to look at it deeper and deeper, there's something super duper cool about everything that's divisible by 7 has something interesting that goes on, and
it's almost as though the 7 touches on infinity or something.
Yes, that is like it.
Yeah, it doesn't have an ending to it.
And when you take the whole numbers from 1 to 7 and divide them by 7, you also get something cool. When we've already done 1/7.
Yeah.
But when you do 2/7, you get 285714.
Okay.
And then when you do 3/7, you get you get 428571.
All right.
It's the same sequence as 142857, except it's in ordinal order.
Yeah. I'd have to see that written out to get it, but
it's mind-boggling.
yeah.
But then, Jim, I started trying to pick out the everything that's divisible by 7 and see what I could find with that. And one of the most unusual numbers, believe it or not, is, what would you think it would be? You know, just from 1 to 100.
Well, 9 is an interesting one.
Well, 9's an interesting number when it bonds with 7,
Yeah.
because you get 3 and 6, or 6 and 3.
Yeah.
All right, so I'm gonna let you off the hook and say 49, because it's 7
right.
times 7.
Yeah. Okay.
Now 7 times 7, when you go 1/49,
Yeah.
it makes a very unusual number. What that number is, I can't sprout it off the top of my head, but I can explain it to you a little bit to show you how interesting it is.
It's Jubilee.
It's very close to Jubilee, but yes, I believe that you're right on the money, because when you get to 7 or 1/49, it tosses away the pattern of 142857. But what it does is it somehow is like the pinnacle of all numbers, and I think that, well, the number starts out like this: 02, 04, 08, 16, and then it keeps on going. I think the next one is 32.
Okay.
And then it keeps going upwards, but it doesn't stay in a doubling pattern, if you know what I mean, because it started out by 02, 04, 08, but it doesn't keep doubling. Because what it does is, when you get, if you were to write it all out and do the long division math for it, of 1 or 49 divided into 1,
Yeah.
if you do the long math for it, when you carry your next number over, you got to add it to the next column, and that's why it doesn't keep doubling. Because once you get, it's such a fascinating number.
Yeah.
And then, I haven't looked into this completely, but there's a little formula that has something to do with the Jubilee.
Yeah.
See, because what's divisible into 50? Can you think of the numbers that multiply into 50?
5 and 10.
5 and 10, 2, because 2 goes into everything that's even.
Yeah.
So 5, 10, and see 25.
Yeah.
And see, the neat thing about 50 is it's got only 2s and 5s in it,
Yeah.
which are prime numbers. and it has no other number in it. So it kind of corresponds to 0.
Well, yeah, that's complicated, but you think about it, that these numbers that, of course, the Lord designed all those numbers and created them. In some ways, even like, for example, Pentecost, is 50.
Yeah.
And there's a reason for that. It's not just some number you just picked out of a hat, because it does tell you something about the infinity of it. When some disciples said, "Should I just forgive my brothers 7 times?" Lord said 70 times 7.
Right.
And that doesn't mean 490. It doesn't mean you forgive him 490 times. But if he offends you 491 times, you don't have to forgive him anymore. That's not what it means.
Right.
It really means an infinite amount.
Yeah.
So that 77s, if the Lord himself is defined by the number 7, and I say God is 7, or 7 is God, and what is 70 times 7? It just means the infinite experience of even thinking about who God is. And it doesn't mean God is 490. That, well, the minute you pull these numbers down to literal numbers, you start limiting God.
Yeah.
So he uses them to illustrate things that cannot be comprehended,
Yeah.
And so all these numbers that are picked out that he uses, 3, representing God as well, 10 representing his authority, and 7 representing his infinite perfection, and 5 representing not only his spiritual work but also the conflict with the enemies, and 2 representing the Lord's people or his house, 1 representing himself. Everything has a number. 4 is the doorway, the door. And so on. So, but if people don't take the time to look them up, they won't mean nothing.
That's right.
They just read.
They'll just sit there and they'll be there.
Yeah.
It's the same thing as the Scriptures.
Sure. Just like when,
if you don't look into it, you won't find anything.
Cornelius sent 3 soldiers down to get Peter. Why 3? Is there a reason for that? And I mentioned to somebody, maybe in my class, I don't remember, but I said, there's no words in the Bible that are just there for filler. Every single word has a reason to be there. And not necessarily in our translation because they messed it up.
Yeah.
But in the Hebrew, they're written there to mean something. And if you leave a word out or don't put it in or change it, something's going to happen to the truth. It doesn't mean you're not going to get rid of the truth, but you can make it to where people won't understand it. And so it's important to get them right. And if we don't know what a word means, look it up, find out what it means, Or I spend a fair amount of time, not very much, but sometime just looking up the names,
Yeah.
How many names are there? Just thousands of names, And they're not there just to identify somebody. They're there to, the Lord said, and this is one way that I finally began to get what he was talking about. He said, these scriptures you guys are studying, they're about me.
Yeah.
And so I thought, well, I never thought about that. I'd read a story about Ruth coming back with Naomi, or about Daniel in the lion's den or something. I never thought about that representing who God is,
Yeah.
But just like David going after Goliath, I always thought it was just a young guy killing a giant. Well, it's not about a boy killing a giant. It's about the Lord defeating his enemy. And it was written for us to realize how great he is, But I never saw that till not too long ago. But so it pays to take the time to look it up if you really want to know what it is.
Amen.
And it won't, they're parables, and a parable doesn't explain itself. You have to search it out, The disciples, it says every time, they didn't understand this until after the resurrection.
Yeah.
And they would hear him say things, and he'd speak it quite clearly, but they still didn't get it. And you think, how come they don't get it? They're not stupid, but it's just above the level of human understanding. And so when they finally experience being with him in his resurrection, all of a sudden they start to see what it's really talking about, you know. And so,
You gonna make it home okay?
oh yeah.
Your eyes bothering you?
Well, I get a little bit blurry sometimes, but
Yeah, well,
it'll come out.
don't get
Yeah,
too
I'll be
blurry.
okay. So, did you ever determine if that thing recorded?
You know what? I don't know. I'll have to just go listen to it.
Well-
I think I had it too low tonight.
Oh.
So we
Yeah.
might have just got the last few minutes.
Well, if it didn't work, as far as his lesson goes, Molly's got him done, and I got it on mine, but it takes a while.
It would take a while.
Yeah.
It would take a while.
Well,
So we can set an appointment to do that.
maybe so. Yeah, whenever you want to.
Because I don't know how long we're gonna be able to do it in this car with this cold. We had to crank it up 5 times tonight.
That's all right.
Yeah.
It heats pretty good once it
I'll turn the light
turn
on.
on. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
It's no problem to warm it up a little bit.
Yeah.
The one good thing about it don't cost nothing, and you can bring
Yeah.
goodies with you. And
That's
the coffee's
right.
great, and we're not going to be interrupted by anything.
That's right.
Or some guy come along and tell you have to leave because we're closing or something.
And if they were,
Yeah.
we could just leave.
Yeah.
we could just we're in a car. We could just get
Yeah.
up and go. Well, it was good.
Okay. Well.